Canada's national identity has been up for debate since our large nation was founded. Now approaching our 150th year, the question of our identity remains unchanged. However, many argue the fabric of our identity, as threadbare as it may be, is at risk. Dr. David Terrace sounds the alarm bells in his 2015 book Digital Mosaic: Media, Power and Identity in Canada by explaining the complex and connected reasons we as citizens should be concerned with our national identity, not only how it is formed, but where it is going in the years ahead. After all, our identity is more than maple syrup, Pacific salmon, and Green Gables. We're a whole lot more. But sadly, we're seeing decreasing numbers of Canadians building on the collective and diverse strengths that built this country. However, it appears as a citizen, you simply don't care about helping to shape the country. According to the latest polls regarding citizen engagement, which measure activities like donating to a cause you care about, attending social clubs, or voting in the latest election, it appears you aren't active or even interested. Many individuals who comprise the Canadian public have decided instead to disengage from the liberal public sphere, the sphere which mediates between society and state, in which the public organizes itself as the bearer of public opinion. So what? Why does it matter? What does this mean for me? Well, according to Terrace, it does matter. The consequences are that we're more likely to follow public issues and respond with our gut feelings, which are easily manipulated by shrewd advertising and the likability of leaders spreading their messages. He argues that we're at a danger point, as we have been left without enough knowledge to have a functioning democracy. Maybe the messages from the Conservatives' attack campaign from our last federal election can be generalized. Maybe we're all just not ready. The arguments presented in this video are offered through the lens of Chapter 2 of Terrace's book, Identity and Citizenship in Canada, as we look at who composes the public sphere in Canada and how this assemblage is affecting modern Canadian identity in the digital age. We question whether digital media and new technologies have created infrastructures that allow increased participation, or, as Terrace laments, the loss of traditional media's hegemony and ability to create and hold a mass audience, almost eliminating the central meeting place of the culture. So now what? How do we engage with each other cross-province, cross-culture, and cross-platform? And how do we do it within the geographic vastness of our country? First, to discuss the public in Canada, we shouldn't ignore the enormity of our nation and the vastness between us. It's our wide-open spaces that form an integral part of this nation's identity. We are far more obsessed with images of wilderness than other cultures, which we express through books, paintings, and poems. From Emily Carr's renditions of totems to Lauren Harris's take on Jordan Bay, one thing remains constant. As Canadians, we champion the uniqueness of our surroundings. And although this is a celebrated artistic form of expression, these pieces relay our physical challenges in a way that further encourages our digital connection to one another. This appreciation of our diverse landscape and even more diverse culture could, in part, explain why Canadians spend more time online in 2013 than any other country, except the United States. The internet is a critical tool for sharing our lives with family and friends via social media platforms like Facebook, while never having to actually travel further than a computer screen or mobile phone to see one another. At least in some areas of social engagement, the main function of the internet seems rather one of active information and communication, which the internet provides in an individualized form at any time that is conducive to social interaction. Each member of this 5-person group that produced this video for our master's program understands the benefits of social media in helping collaborate over great distances. With a simple keystroke, we're able to tap into a vast knowledge base unimaginable 2 decades ago. We've produced this video from 2 different provinces for a university located in a 3rd province. Our approach to completing our work celebrated our geographic and cultural differences and built on our own unique experiences. Combined, team expertise is derived from the areas of education, media, government, and private sector organizations. The majority of Canadians are also reaching coast to coast and beyond our national borders to seek connections and information. And perhaps more than keeping up with their family and friends just cities away, Canadians are arguably looking to connect more globally with their loved ones than any other nation. According to Statistics Canada, in 2011, Canada had a foreign-born population that represented 20.6% of the total population, the highest proportion among the G8 countries, and more than 200 ethnic origins were reported in the 2011 National Household Survey. Canada is described as a nation with an ethno-cultural mosaic as indicated by its immigrant population, the ethno-cultural backgrounds of its people, the visible minority population, linguistic characteristics, and religious diversity. Which brings us to our second point regarding our Canadian identity. According to Terrace, our international diversity is both our greatest strength and our greatest vulnerability. He states that Canada has, since World War II, taken in more immigrants per capita than any other country in history. Unlike countries like Italy or Japan, Canada does not have a set identity brought together by common traditions, food, or language. In fact, 3/4 of the foreign-born Canadian population are able to conduct a conversation in more than one language. I learned English as my third language and French as my fourth language when we immigrated to Canada. I was told to only ever tell people that I was Canadian if they asked. It's not that my past is shameful, but rather that it became irrelevant once I merged into my Canadian identity, which for my mother meant going to a public school, learning the national languages, and having a sense of pride that I was now Canadian. We were now Canadians, and how other Canadians saw us was important. Their opinion mattered, and the public opinion mattered. So how can society judge the legitimacy of public opinion in a global communication context? When looking outward to connect with an ever-growing social circle, has the public sphere grown too large to focus on local issues like the next election? So the key question regarding national identity is not who makes the public sphere in Canada, but who's Canada and which identity? In a country as diverse as Canada, when was the last time you engaged in a Canadian Somali community online or joined a Ukrainian Facebook group if neither are in your heritage or family? Rather than relying on one or two traditional forms of media to set the public agenda, our diverse communities and individuals are ensconced in their own little bubbles. To approach these bubbles in context of the public, extensively discussed among scholars in the mainstream United States media as a comparison to their own approach to immigration, we look at the work of Fraser and Keene, who assert that Habermas's original theories on the public sphere require rethinking as we move into a digital world. So when we look to the idea of the public in Canada for the remainder of this presentation, we do so with a convenient modernization of Habermas's theory, that of multiple spheres diverse and pocketed but nonetheless contributing to public opinion, Canadian identity, and democracy. And while this is a positive perspective in which to frame our conversation on the Canadian public, it is not without its challenges. The problem is that our nation is in a state of media shock. According to Terrace, we are in a period of crisis in traditional media, public broadcasting, news and journalism, and citizen engagement. We no longer have our favorite television programs bringing us together on issues as a public, and we rely more on online tools for news and sharing of our identity. Our identity is no longer impacted by CBC's Mr. Dress-Up. Canadians are now impacted by a vast global entertainment marketplace where Kim Kardashian's latest footwear choice is celebrated for its global impact. We're more engaged with the latest celebrity scandal than we are with the national political agenda. We're essentially very engaged with our means of disengagement. On the issue of the public in Canada in particular, there's perhaps no greater crisis than that of citizen engagement. Coined as the disengagement crisis, Terrace explains that voting is still a key litmus test of a country's political health because it not only determines the shape of governments and policy decisions, but also has great symbolic value. The public sphere should hold those in power accountable and express the will of its citizens. The normative legitimacy and political efficacy of public opinion are essential to the concept of the public sphere in democratic theory. If this is the test, we're failing. Well, some of us are. Do you hear me, millennials? The decline in voter turnout at its lowest point since Confederation at just 58.8% for the 2008 election is almost entirely explained by young people not showing up to cast their ballot. Terrace refers to younger Canadians, those who came of age in a web-based media and culture, as digital natives and calls them dropouts, in reference to their contribution to the public sphere. Although digital natives are more pluralistic, global, and technologically savvy than previous generations, they disappear suddenly from the political landscape when votes are counted. This form of disengagement may, in part, have something to do with online media use at the expense of traditional media. These traditional media outlets have long acted as intermediary between the public and government. But in certain areas of Canada, that intermediary role is being further blurred as news reporters take on political roles. In 2015, the Alberta NDP party formed government, and in doing so changed the political communications and public landscape within the province. To satisfy its mandate, the newly formed NDP government hired over 20 former journalists into political roles. The rush of journalists to government is happening at a time when the media landscape could be charitably described as grim. Postmedia, the company that publishes the majority of Canada's major newspapers, recently announced that it was looking to reduce overhead by 20% through voluntary buyouts. For a journalist, what could be more attractive than leveraging their skill to make more money as a public relations professional? The ratio of public relations people to journalists is now 4-1 according to census data. In 1991, the ratio was 2-1. The lure of these new jobs is not just in the security they provide. PR jobs tend to pay about 40% more than journalism jobs, according to data from the United States. More public relations people means more people to spin the message as opposed to validating it for the public sphere. Habermas's concept of the public sphere is grounded in the relationship between the media and the people. Once the media acted as the rational critical hub for society, but this is changing. For Habermas, unrestricted access to the public sphere is a defining characteristic, with the role of mass media central in its process. With the role of traditional media sliding to the background, observers argue that a great deal of civic connectedness now takes place online. But Terrace describes this online engagement as an illusion of political involvement, and that this disconnectedness may have devastating effects on democracy. Because if Canadians have disappeared as citizens, they no longer constitute a public despite our online connectedness. And democracy isn't the only thing at risk. According to Terrace, the interactions in face-to-face arenas where the public traditionally have come together to form public opinion is on the decline. Membership rates within service clubs and professional sports teams has dropped. Community involvement and civic participation has declined while we all increase our online participation. Has this replaced our need to meet up, or are we left without the physical, social infrastructure that allows us to have meaningful contributions to Canadian society? If we're not participating in our community, where are we investing our time and our money? What exactly do we stand for? If voting is a meter stick for healthy democracy, then perhaps donating to causes we care about or voting with our dollar can be the meter stick for community participation. Sadly, despite online giving explosions of an unpredictable nature like the ALS Bucket Challenge, Canadians also give less generously than they used to. So who's to blame for all of this? One group is not necessarily to blame, and while it would be easy and obvious to blame millennials for this mess, our disengagement crisis crosses all demographics and socioeconomic boundaries. This disappearing act may be better explained by the growing gap between the rich and the poor in Canada. Coined as pay-to-play by Terrace, the elitist civic engagement further endangers individual access to the public sphere. It seems those with the means to do so are at the center of enacting scenarios that benefit personal rather than collective interests. At the center of democratic life are the public spheres in which private citizens learn about and comment on issues that concern them. These discursive activities take place in varied settings: classrooms, associations, unions, communities, meetings, and in provincial and national arenas. While most citizens of Canada and Australia take access to these spaces for granted, a great many other citizens are systematically excluded. Terrace mentions that university-educated people tend to be better off economically and more engaged with society, to a point where we're leaving many voiceless. But despite the growing cost barriers to access the public sphere, it's not all bad news. Volunteerism by Canadians is on the rise. Volunteerism is free and offers a practical way for individuals to form social connections, in part explaining why the proportion of Canadians aged 15 and over who volunteer rose from 45% in 2004 to 47% in 2010, with digital natives leading the way. People are also donating their time online, and it's these digital natives whose generosity may change capital, which relies on human generosity, coupled with the connectedness of our digital world, can solve global problems, he presents. Shirky describes this notion as civic value, the value created by participants but enjoyed by society as a whole. Scholar Neve said that social relationships, social networks, or social ties are the only common elements of the definitions of social capital. Social capital equals the benefits we obtain from our social relationships. In the example of either physical or digital volunteerism, one could argue that the benefits extend beyond the individualistic and do help constitute a public sphere, one that's growing in Canada. Unique to Canadians, there may be no greater bond in our identity and our well-formed public opinion than that of the pushback effect, that is, our common ground to assert differences from our neighbors to the south, the USA. With the demise of traditional media, can the public sphere be legitimized when online interactions and content are manipulated by a small number of massive corporations which are largely American, such as Google? We ultimately follow their agenda according to potential profit, which doesn't necessarily align with the real issues we as a public need to discuss through the lens of Canadian democracy. As Stefanik and Wall warn, media information that is decoupled from national identities in favor of a global consumer identity serves to reinforce the propensity of individuals to self-identify as a consumer as opposed to a citizen. However, despite this onslaught of American-centric culture online where the CRTC is unable to assert its power, the more that Canadians are exposed to American culture, the greater their resistance to it. There's perhaps no greater time in history than now when the core values of American politics and Canadians have never been further apart. Whether it's our strong support for our public university system, employment insurance, pensions, healthcare, or immigration policies, we are solid. The very recent online flurry of Canadian pride, an unusual form of togetherness in the wake of Donald Trump's executive orders, does not simply say, "We are Canadian." It says, "We are not American." Let's wrap this up. As ethnically diverse and as geographically splintered as we are, Canadians are forming our collective identity in multiple spheres. We are engaging online to define and assert Canadian values, culture, and ultimately our own identity. Although one voice through one public sphere is unattainable in this vast nation and arguably in any nation due to globalization, the digital sphere offers a virtual discussion space for Canadians, a nation whose people are spending a lot of time online. Sure, many of us are disengaged and using our online time for entertainment, Terrace confirms that social media sites such as Facebook and Twitter allow people who are already engaged in politics to become even more engaged. So while we have a lot to fear about the public sphere in Canada in wake of the disengagement crisis, there is room for hope. Hope that the tangled threads that comprise the digital sphere can cross both vast and economic differences to allow us, as Canadians, to weave together a bright and vibrant tapestry that will help form our collective identity as we look towards the next 150 years of Canada's evolution.